For those of you who don't know me, my name is Hilary Regan. I'm the CEO and publisher of ATF Press, which by happy coincidence is based here in Adelaide. We're a publishing house that publishes about 30 books a year in 3 different imprints, and we'll have a 4th imprint this year. It will be ATF France with books in French. This book tonight is being published by ATF Press. We have ATF Theology and we have books out of China, but we deliberately decided for a variety of reasons to put this book under the imprint ATF Press so that we wouldn't have any problems with the bishops by having it under ATF Theology. Well, regardless of that, we have had a few problems with some of the bishops, as you may have heard. So tonight, unfortunately, as Frank will explain in a minute, Bill is not able to be with us. He's been in hospital with pneumonia. We had, this is one of 6 launches around the country. The very first launch was supposed to be in Toowoomba last week, and I was to meet Bill at the airport in Brisbane, and we were going to drive to Toowoomba. Well, unfortunately, when I got to the airport, he said, "Bill, I'm here now," and he says, "Well, I'm not." I said, "Oh, what's wrong with you? Far away." He said, "Well, I'm pretty sick, so I don't think I can make the launch in Toowoomba." I went, which caused a few problems for the next few days. But we went ahead and had the launch in Sydney and Brisbane, and then earlier this week we had a launch in Sydney with Frank did, and we did a number of other launches coming up. By the time of the last 2 launches, the rescheduled launch Toowoomba on the 14th of July, Frank will be well and truly back on the net, and in Melbourne next Friday night, we're hoping we will be there. So thank you all for coming. There are books over there which we'll talk about later, which can't be signed, of course, but it's our great honour to have Frank Brennan back here in Adelaide again, and many of you know him, and many here in the parish have heard him earlier this year. So without much further ado, Father Frank Brennan, SJ, will talk to us about it.
Good evening, everyone. It's always great to come back to Norwood, so thank you very much for your welcome. Thanks to Hilary, and thank you to Father Paul, who put on a fine dinner for us this evening. Paul Morris phoned me this morning. He's so sick that I didn't even recognise the voice. He's still in hospital with pneumonia, but hopefully will be out of hospital tomorrow morning. And he knows that you join with him in prayer and solidarity, and he's very grateful for your support and asked me to give a message to you tonight of gratitude for your turning out on what he knew would be an Adelaide winter night. I'm delighted to be asked to participate in the launch of Bill Morris's book, Benedict, Me and the Cardinals 3. No, I don't think I would have chosen the title. And I probably wouldn't have chosen the cover, but it's not my book. Bill was Bishop of Toowoomba for 18 years. Now, Toowoomba, I should explain for you South Australians, Toowoomba is a provincial city about 100 kilometres to the west of Brisbane. It's on the Great Dividing Range, and the Toowoomba diocese stretches from Toowoomba right out to the Northern Territory border, out to places like Birdsville and Quilpie. So you've got something in the picture? It's vast, and it covers more than the size of 3 European countries combined, etc. So this book is the story of Bill's forced retirement at the insistence of Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI and at the instigation of 3 Roman imperial cardinals, all of whom have now left the Vatican, having passed retirement age. Naturally, we weren't expecting any of those 4 to be with us this evening. But sadly, Bill couldn't be with us either, being laid up in his hospital bed in Military Queensland. In the 1960s, I lived for 5 years in the Toowoomba Diocese while attending Downlands College, a boarding school for boys conducted by the missionaries of the Sacred Heart. I think the MSCs may still have a parish here. Yes. At that time, I had regularly to deny any relationship to the then Bishop of Toowoomba, William Brennan, who gave very long sermons on hot and cold days, much to the displeasure of downland students. I used to have to emerge from chapel, bravely claiming to be from another branch of the family back there in the bog. Some of the key priests who appear in Bill Morris's book were also educated at Downlands College. The MSCs, as any of you would know them, have a no-nonsense style to them, enjoying their independence from the local bishop while being very dedicated to the pastoral care of people in the far-flung country diocese and always attentive to the pastoral requests of the parish priests, a disproportionate number of whom did go to Downlands College. I remember one MSc unexpectedly arriving at the school mid-year to teach French. It was just after Humane Vitae, and he'd expressed some reservations while ministering south of the Tweed River, so it was thought that he should come and teach boys in country Queensland. One of the ex-Downlanders to appear in the book is Bill Morris's Vicar General, Peter Dorfield, who, shortly to form as one of the world's most punctilious note-takers, provided a detailed account to Bill about his unfortunate meeting with the papal visitator, Archbishop Charles Chaput, who came to the diocese for 4 days, including Anzac Day in 2007, to report on the state of the diocese. So you have this situation, an American bishop sent out by the Vatican to investigate a country diocese in Australia over 4 days, including Anzac Day. Can you imagine what it's like turning up in a country town on Anzac Day, saying, "Oh, hello, I'm a visitator here from Rome. I've come to inquire about the state of your diocese." And one of the things I should emphasise about the book is it does contain a lot of detail which Bill has got directly from people who were interviewed by Archbishop Chaput. Chaput told Dorfield, and I'm going to quote here, that Morris was a good, humane and prayerful bishop, but innocent and naive and open to manipulation because of his great desire to see good in everyone, and that people had taken advantage of his goodness and trust. So you're already getting a sense of the dichotomy, aren't you? This silly, foolish country bishop, there he was, with a great desire to see good in everyone, and people taking advantage of his goodness and trust. He'd been captured, manipulated and misled by a so-called progressive group of priests in the diocese who were in fact running the diocese. As a result of the action of these priests, he'd been led astray and now needed to recant and in effect throw himself on the mercy of the Vatican authorities, promising a more orthodox and obedient future. End quote. After discussing Bishop Morris's 2006 Advent Pastoral Letter, Archbishop Chaput then raised the topic of outrageous liturgies and then made a series of denigrating comments about different priests. Now, you should understand, in a country diocese like Toowoomba, there is an extraordinary sense of camaraderie amongst the diocesan clergy. And for a foreigner to come into the Vicar General and start sounding off about the shortcomings of the rest of the clergy, it's not a very good look. When Dorfield had the temerity to defend them, Chaput suggested it might be time for a new Vicar General because of Dorfield's perceived undue influence on Morris as a bishop and Morris's personal inadequacies in theological practice. So a mythology had developed in Rome that Morris wasn't really capable himself of these theological utterances, so obviously he was being put up to it by these priests in the diocese. So this gives you some flavour of the book. It contains accurate recollections of a sham process instituted in Rome to get rid of Bill Morris at any cost and regardless of any particular charges. Speaking with Peter Dorfield in preparation for tonight's launch, I asked him what were the key lessons now for the Church of Toowoomba. And I spoke to him again after the Sydney launch and he said to me that he really hadn't emphasised sufficiently one key insight for people to have is that in his experience, Bill Morris has in him no bitterness whatever about what went on. And in this, he has been a true inspiration to the priests and to the people of the diocese after all of this. Dorfield reminded me that Christ's faithful in Toowoomba wanted nothing more than the truth. It's important to remember that Bill Morris was removed from office. He did not resign. He always displayed the highest pastoral integrity and paid the price for it. He was the consummate team player who planned his pastoral strategies in close consultation with his presbyterate and the various consultative organs he had set up in the diocese. As the people of Toowoomba continue to live faithful lives as Catholics, they still hold Bill in high esteem. Meanwhile, all the people in Rome are now gone. As Peter says, it was a poor decision based on poor advice. And in fact, to this day, I gather once a month, there's a prayer vigil held in Toowoomba for Bill and for the church, and 30 to 40 people turn up for that prayer vigil. I first met Bill Morris when he was secretary to Archbishop Francis Rush, Archbishop of Brisbane, and President of the Australian Catholic Bishops' Conference. Just to say a word about the Queensland Bishops' Conference. I went to Queensland University in the early 1970s. The main library we used to study in at the university was called the Dewey Library, named after Sir James Dewey, the Catholic Archbishop of Brisbane. Now, you South Australians probably have something of the same experience of this as we Queenslanders. Any talk about the Catholic Church and history in Australia, it always centres around Sydney and Melbourne. And it's as if the rest of us are some sort of second-raters who don't quite measure up in terms of church, particularly church engaged in society. Well, as I say, there will never be a Mannix library at Melbourne University, and it's very unlikely there'll be a Pell library at the university. So, the fact that we studied in the Dewey Library, I think, tells you something about the ethos that existed in the church in Queensland. So, Rush at that time was the president of the Australian Catholic Bishops' Conference. He and his fellow Queensland bishops had appointed me prior to ordination as their advisor on Aboriginal affairs in the wake of controversy between the Queensland church leaders and the colourful Sir Joe Bjelke-Petersen in the lead up to the 1982 Commonwealth Games. Even under Bishop Edward Kelly, MSc, who was fairly conservative, the Toowoomba Presbyterate were quite engaged on justice issues. I remember spending a week motoring all the way up to Quilpie and back with Peter Dorfield to meet with each deanery in the diocese to discuss Aboriginal rights. In Toowoomba, we had a formal meeting at the Bishop's house, followed by a fine meal with silver table service. In Dalby, we met at the presbytery and chatted over a meal. In Roma, we gathered on the presbytery veranda over a few beers, and out of Charleville, we had a muster by the river and a fine barbie. Pastoral style became more relaxed and theological niceties less relevant the further west you went. And I think that's probably a large part of the story of the Diocese of Toowoomba and how it became so incomprehensible to their eminences there in Rome. I well recall Bill's Episcopal ordination in Toowoomba in 1993. It was a very joyous and participative liturgy. Aboriginal Catholics played a central role. Darling Downs farmers presented some of their produce at the altar. Women were even spotted on sanctuary. The formal reading of the Latin papal bull was performed at an earlier ceremony, much to the consternation of a handful of conservative Catholics. After the Mass, the then papal nuncio, Archbishop Brambilla, called aside the MC, who was the parish priest of Cunnamulla, a fellow with a fairly laid-back style. He was a very keen punter on horses, I remember. His Grace detailed the 35 liturgical abuses which occurred during the liturgy.